Hey guys, this is Brian Mounts. I run turfmechanic.com, and today I want to talk to you about weed prevention. This is part of my spring lawn care guide. This is just a segment of it, but I think it's a very important segment of it, and I'm releasing this towards the end of January, first part of February for a reason. If you are in a warm southern state, rule of thumb is you're going to be putting down pre-emergent somewhere in the month of February, probably mid to late February. If you're in the middle of the country, one of those transition zone areas, you might be putting down a weed prevention product or a pre-emergent in the month of March, maybe early March. And if you're in a colder climate, you might be putting stuff down at the end of March or even the very beginning part of April. We got to talk about it now so that we can get our products ready to go for when it's time to put it down. As homeowners, it's important to note that killing weeds is different from preventing weeds. That's obvious if you really put it that bluntly. What we want to do at the end of winter and the beginning part of spring is prevent weeds from infesting our lawns before it happens. And that's what we're talking about here. The way that these products prevent weeds, for the most part, I mean, this is just one, there are many, and I'm going to talk about a number of them in this video. The way that these products work is that they prevent a barrier. It's kind of like a chemical barrier that's in that first upper inch and a half or so of soil. And when a seed germinates, the first thing that happens before you even see a sprout coming up, the first thing that happens is it starts sending a taproot down. That is the germination process for weeds and for desirable plants, whether it be in the vegetable garden or grass. So what happens when you put this material on the ground, it creates this chemical barrier, and then when the weed seed or grass seed, any kind of seed really, once it germinates, the root goes down and goes into this chemical barrier that essentially starves the plant and doesn't allow that root to continue rooting down. The plant ends up dying before you even see it. What's important to take out of that, however, is that it stops the rooting process of pretty much anything, including desirable stuff like grass. Now, lots of people want to overseed or put grass seed down in the spring, and that is a beast in and of itself. The best thing to do is to put seed down in the fall. And that means that if you're putting down a weed preventer in the spring, you really got to think about what you're doing, how much you're putting down, how long it lasts. So, for instance, if you have a cold season grass like a tall fescue, that is a very common grass to get overseeded every fall. Some people overseed fescue into their lawns every single autumn. And if you're doing that, that grass seed is never going to germinate if you're putting down a strong product on a heavy dose that lasts all the way into the fall. Of all of the commonly used weed prevention products for lawns, for residential lawn settings, prodiamine tends to be the most common one. And the reason for that is because it is cheap, it is affordable, it's easy to find in regular stores, and it spreads very easily and it lasts for a very long time. It's also viable on cold season grasses and warm season grasses. It's a very usable product for most everybody. What's also interesting and cool about it is that you can put down a product that uses prodiamine as its main active ingredient, and you can put it down at various dose strengths. Now, if you put down a heavy dose, it's going to last for 7 to 8 months. If you put down a light dose, it will last 3 to 4 months. If you put down a dose in between, it will last for that amount of time. So what's great about it is that you can kind of pick and choose how much to put down so long as you're within the thresholds of minimum viability and maximum. You can pick and choose how much you want to put down. I like that. This product here, this is a Scott's product. This is the Halt's Crabgrass Grassy Weed Preventer. Also, Scott's makes Weed X, which is basically the same thing. That uses a different active ingredient, pendamethalin. Pendimethalin is similar because it is very easy to spread. This is just a granular product. You can buy this at Home Depot or Walmart or just about anywhere. It's easy to find. It doesn't cost very much. The difference with this is that it doesn't last as long. So if you pick up a bag of this and put it on your lawn, it is going to stop those things that we don't want from growing in our lawns later in the spring and the summer. The problem is it's not going to last nearly as long. A full dose of this at bag rate, the full dose, is going to last you between 9 and 13 weeks, depending on environmental conditions. Now, before we get further into the video, we should really make it a point to understand that every single one of these products has a higher efficacy rate when the product is put on the lawn first. So although this product might work for 3 months, it's going to work better in the first month than it is in the second. And it's going to work better in the second month than it is in the third. And the same thing goes for the prodiamine applications. Those products are designed to work at the high rate for up to 8 months. But the 8th month, you're going to get very little protection compared to the first and second months. As I'm filming this video, it's in the middle of winter. Some lawn care companies are out there preparing to start applying pre-emergent as early as the end of January and the beginning parts of February. But as homeowners, when you go to places like Walmart or Home Depot, this early in the season, it can be kind of hard to find these products. This Scott's product is something that I bought last spring and I used on my lawn. This year, however, I purchased a bag of Anderson's DG. That's their dispersible granule. The product is called Barricade, and its main ingredient is prodiamine. Now, prodiamine can be found in a number of other products out there. This is just the one that I chose because the bag is about the size of my lawn. It's not going to give me too much excess. What you should keep in mind here is that the product itself isn't exactly what you care about. It's the active ingredient that you care about. And when it comes to applying these pre-emergents or these weed preventers to our lawn in the early spring, we want to make sure that we don't use a product that includes fertilizer in it. There are lots of products that include fertilizer, and those just aren't appropriate to be putting on the lawn in the month of February, March, and April, depending on where you live. You shouldn't really be fertilizing your lawn with nitrogen before the grass starts growing on its own. Now, as you decide which product you want to put on your lawn, your main consideration really is going to be duration, or the amount of product you are comfortable putting on the lawn. For me, last year I put down this product, and again, this is now being bagged as Scott's Weed X. It's the same stuff. Now, there are going to be a number of differences between the two active ingredients and the two products, but in my opinion, just as a homeowner and a user, a DIY lawn care guy, the most important difference to me is that I have to put an entire bag rate of this product down, and I'm going to get about 2.5 months worth of coverage. It's going to prevent weeds from germinating for about, let's call it 11 weeks on average. If, however, I use the Anderson's DG, the product that includes prodiamine as its active ingredient, I can use half of the bag rate, so I can put down a smaller chemical dose to my lawn and get an extra month's worth of coverage. Let's call that on average about 15 weeks. Now, I live in a cold climate. Around here, it's common for the grass not to be growing all the way up until April. Not only that, but grassy weeds, for instance crabgrass, they don't tend to germinate until the soil temperatures get up to around 55 degrees on average. Now that means if my grass isn't growing until April, the crabgrass isn't germinating yet either. So if I'm putting down a product on April 1st, I don't want that product to continue working for 6 months because that takes me too far into fall. April, May, June, July, August, September. That's 6 months into September. A full app of prodiamine is just too far. So I'm going to be putting down a half rate, and that allows me to feel better about myself in that I'm putting less chemicals on the lawn to prevent these weeds, because if I was using this, I would have to put it down twice to get that same 5-month coverage to get me into August. I would rather put half an application of the other product than 2 applications of this. Now, all of that assumes that these are the only 2 active ingredients that you have at your disposal, which is not true at all. There is actually a third product which is very commonly found in household garages. It's a product that uses the active ingredient Dithyappir. Dithyappir is another pre-emergent that will stop grassy weeds and other seeds from germinating, or I should say from rooting, just like these other products will. The difference is it also can act a little bit as a post-emergent. So for instance, if you don't get around to putting your weed prevention product on the lawn early enough in the season, let's say it's mid to late April and your grass has been growing for a month already and your soil temperatures are up around 60 degrees, you can very easily go out and find a product that uses Dithyappir as its active ingredient, and it's going to start working as a pre-emergent on the seeds that have not yet germinated, but it's also going to act as a post-emergent, a weed killer for the baby weeds, the ones that did germinate already within the last few weeks. Now, the problem with using Dithyappir as your main product to prevent weeds is that it costs notably more. It's not exorbitant, it's not going to break the bank, but it is significantly more expensive than getting things like pendamethalin or prodiamine. Also, if you're using the full bag application rate for Dithyappir, you're only going to be getting about 3 to 4 months of coverage, which means, let's say you're late in the game and you're putting it down in May, let's say May 1st, you're going to be getting coverage for May, June, July, and maybe August. Now, depending on where you live, that could be fine, but other places, it might not be enough coverage if you're using that as your primary weed prevention tool in the shed. For me, I don't own Dithyappir products of any kind, and I don't plan on buying them because I have a different strategy that I'm going to employ for my late season weed prevention. For the best possible practice, any of these products should be put down just before the weed seeds start germinating. So in that 50 to 55 degree range. Now, I have other videos on this channel where I have showed how long it takes seed to germinate, and we're talking about grass seed. And one video in particular that I'm talking about is my perennial rye germination at various temperatures video. So if you haven't watched that video, please do. It's linked up here and I'll link to it down below in the description. But it goes to show you that at the correct temperature, at the optimal temperature, a seed will germinate very quickly. But at a lower temperature, the seed will germinate very slowly. It still will germinate, but much slower. And depending on how much the temperature undulates, it fluctuates from day to night, will slow down the seed germination. So even if your soil temperature might touch 55 degrees in the middle of the afternoon, that doesn't mean that seed, although those weed seeds are going to germinate right away. The fact of the matter is, in the middle of the night, your soil temperature might be 45 degrees, and during the day it might be 55 degrees, giving you an average of 50 for the day. The seed is not going to germinate quickly. So for that reason, to be optimal, you will actually wait to put these products down just as average soil temperatures are moving into the 55 degree range. But for me, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting them down ahead of schedule. Now, of course, the greatest efficacy of these products is going to be right after, within those first couple weeks after I've applied the product. And most weed seeds aren't going to be germinating that early. So I am going to lose some effectiveness. But what I'm interested in here is getting the material down early enough so that I can then do a second application at the very end of spring. So I will lose a little bit of efficacy in that kind of May timeframe, maybe early June timeframe, but by mid to late June, I'm going to put down a second application of an organic product that has no chemical base whatsoever. For me, this is what I do to feel better about putting chemicals down on the lawn to prevent the weeds while still balancing out wanting them to be gone. I do want them to be gone, but I don't want to use that much product. So I go for the organic route later in the season. The product that I'm going to be using for that is fairly uncommon. Some people may know about it, but corn gluten meal is a byproduct of milling. And if you get the gluten meal version, you're going to be getting a protein that's included in the corn gluten. I mean, it's the gluten. There's a protein in there that goes into the lawn, and it doesn't act like a chemical barricade. It doesn't act like a chemical stop for rooting of newly sprouted seeds. But what it does do is it kind of sucks the moisture out. It dehydrates the root of the seedling and then kills the plant. So what I'm going to be doing is putting down a prodiamine application probably towards the end of March, because where I live, It's pretty cold late into the season. As spring starts, it's still pretty cold here. So I'm going to put a half dose of prodiamine down at the end of March, and then at the very end of June to the beginning of July, I'm going to be putting down a heavy dose of corn gluten meal for that extra little bit. And that's going to provide some efficacy for another 6 weeks or so, which should push me into August. Additionally, the corn gluten meal provides nutrients to the lawn. It's like a slow release organic fertilizer. It does have an NPK rating. Depending on which product you buy, it could be 1000, it could be 842, it could be 922, it could be it could be any of these things. It's more of a nitrogen base, but you do, in most cases, you do also get a little bit of P and K, which is going to be great to push us through the heat of summer without having to fertilize with heavy, fast-release nitrogen products, which I don't prefer using in my lawn. Now, a discussion of the products that we use in the early spring to prevent weeds later in the year would be incomplete if we don't talk about overseeding or newly seeding patches of our lawn or entire new lawn spaces. For the most part, you just can't do it. You can't put down any form of a weed preventer down and overseed or new seed at the same time. The weed prevention product, all of them are going to prevent the rooting of the new grass seed as well. So it's really not going to work. If you put down the weed preventer, you'll prevent all the weeds, but you'll also prevent your grass seed from germinating as well. The only way really to get around this is to overseed early enough in the season, usually towards the end of winter. Cross your fingers and hope that the grass seed is able to germinate and establish itself fast enough so that after a while you can then apply a weed preventer later in the season. If you do decide to go that route, your options are limited. For one, you have to get the seed to germinate early, and then you have to hope that the seed doesn't freeze before hard frost ends in your neck of the woods. Depending on where you live, that might not be a problem at all. For me, we get frosts and freezing temperatures all the way into May sometimes. So that's a little bit harder around here. But if you do live in an area where you can be reasonably confident where your seedlings aren't going to die of frost if you plant seeds early, you can then come back and add a Dithyappir product later on. You'll end up missing a lot of the early weeds that germinate kind of in that like March time frame, March to April time frame. Some grass types are going to grow a lot faster and mature faster. Perennial rye, tall fescue, these kinds of grasses can germinate very quickly and grow very quickly. There is one option for a pre-emergent that can be put down after a new seedling has grown 2 to 3 inches. The product is enormously expensive, and it's not something that I would ever consider buying myself. But DCPA, which is the active ingredient in a product called Desthal, something like that. I'll write it down below. That product can be applied, according to the label, after seedlings have grown 2 to 3 inches. So you could plant grass seed down and then grow that up. The problem that we're talking about here is literally the cost. It is enormous. So you're hedging your bets, you're kind of gambling that you can get the seed to germinate early enough in the season, grow enough in the season, and then put this wildly expensive product on it that's not really meant for homeowners. I'm not even going to link to it below, but I suppose if you want to Google it, you can. One other option for seeding at the end of winter and the beginning of spring and then coming back after the fact to apply a weed preventer product is to use a product exactly like this, Pendimethalin. According to the label, Pendimethalin can be applied to a newly seeded lawn after 2.5 months have passed. So we're running on a tight schedule here. Imagine if you were able to put seed down towards the end of March, then somewhere around the early part of June, you could put a product like this down on the ground to prevent the late season grassy weeds from emerging. If you're planting perennial rye, that number goes from 2.5 down to 1.5 months. You could apply this product on top of established 1.5-month-old perennial rye, and it shouldn't damage the perennial rye. assuming that you've waited a month and a half. You're definitely going to be missing some of the earlier seeds, weed seeds that germinate, so you will have some grassy weed problems, some crabgrass problems, but you'll at least be able to get new seed down if that's really important for you to get it down in the spring instead of waiting for the fall. Now, having said all of that, in my own yard, I don't plan on doing any seeding here in the main lawn. So I'm going to be putting down my Anderson's DG. It's the prodiamine application. I'm going to put it down at the half rate, probably towards the end of March, depending on my weather and my soil temperatures. The half rate should take me all the way through June, and at the end of June, I'm going to be putting down a corn gluten meal product for a lengthening of the weed suppression season and to add some slow release NPK into the lawn to get me through the summer. There are other things that I'm going to be doing at the end of spring to prepare for summer. I will definitely be producing a video on that in the coming months, so I hope you subscribe and watch that when it comes out. But if you're watching this video right now, probably more important for you is your spring prep. There are definitely a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing in the winter. I have a video about the things that you shouldn't be doing that you could take a look at, but I recommend wholeheartedly that you take a look at my spring lawn care guide video, which covers all of this stuff, all of the things that you should be doing, you should be thinking about to prepare yourself and start spring off on the right foot. You definitely want to suppress the weeds in your lawn, obviously, but there are other things that you could be doing. Some of them are pretty easy to do. Make sure to watch that video. I hope that this video was helpful, and definitely go down into the description below because there are some links to some other videos that relate to this that I think you will find helpful. And for some of the products that I've mentioned on this, they're probably available at your local Home Depot, Walmart, or on Amazon. I will link to some of them down below in the description if that is helpful for you. Thank you very much for your time. Please hit that like button, and I hope to see you in the next video.